It was an ordinary evening. The kind of evening that slips past unnoticed, as if it had no intention of being remembered. I had just finished tidying up the kitchen, putting away the dishes, and stacking the mail that had arrived earlier in a neat little pile. Outside, the sky had turned the familiar shade of deep gray, the kind that softens every edge, blurring the line between day and night. The air was still, a faint chill brushing against the windows. I didn't mind. I liked stillness. I sat down in my favorite chair by the window, the one with the small lamp next to it. The lamp cast a warm circle of light, enough to read by, enough to feel like a companion. My phone buzzed quietly on the table beside me. A text from a friend, nothing urgent. I smiled slightly, typing a reply, careful not to make a sound that might disturb the calm. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked in the distance. I could hear it clearly, sharp against the soft hum of the evening. There was nothing unusual about it. I didn't think anything about it. I brewed a cup of tea, inhaling the warmth, the faint aroma of chamomile. It was the kind of moment that made life feel solid, like it would continue this way indefinitely. And then the phone rang. Not a notification, not a vibration. A ring. Sharp, insistent, breaking the quiet. I looked at it, a number I didn't recognize. My finger hovered. Curiosity, mild and unfocused, pushed me to swipe answer. I said hello without much thought. The voice on the other end was soft. Not quite familiar, but not entirely strange either. There was a calmness in it, a quiet insistence. It spoke about things I had done that day, little details no stranger could know. I laughed nervously. Probably a wrong number, I told myself. I didn't think further. I nodded to no one. The evening continued. I sipped my tea. I stared out the window at the darkening street. The house across from mine was quiet. My neighbor's curtains were drawn. I didn't think anything about it. Nothing unusual. Yet, as I sat there, I realized the warmth from my lamp wasn't enough to keep the chill away. A subtle unease had settled somewhere deep, just beneath consciousness, quiet and patient. I went to my bookshelf, running my hand along the spines, noticing the texture, the dust, the familiar weight of paper. I picked a book and opened it, letting the words fill the silence. But every time I turned a page, I thought I heard the phone, a soft vibration, almost like a whisper. I checked it. Nothing. I returned to my chair, pretending the feeling wasn't there. Minutes passed. Slowly. Deliberately. The kind of slow that makes you aware of every tick of the clock, every breath. And then, softly, almost imperceptibly, the ringing began again. I told myself it was just a wrong number again, that there was nothing to worry about. Still, the sound lingered in my mind. The way the line had carried a strange, quiet insistence, knowing details, mentioning things I hadn't said aloud, was unsettling. I tried to focus on the book in my hands, the texture of the pages, the faint scent of old paper and waxed shelves. But the edges of my vision seemed to tremble, like the light from the lamp was hesitating. A soft click. My phone vibrated gently against the table. I froze. My heart thumped slowly but deliberately, a rhythm that seemed louder than it should. I picked it up. No one was calling. No one was texting. I set it down, trying to ignore the tight knot forming in my stomach. Outside, the streetlights flickered once, then twice. The kind of flicker that makes shadows dance, that bends familiar shapes into strange, unknown forms. I could see the outline of my neighbor's house, a solid block of darkness, yet somehow the windows seemed to shift as if someone, or something, was inside, watching. I shook my head, exhaling slowly. I didn't see anyone. Of course not. It was nothing. Just a trick of the light. I returned to my chair. I tried to sip my tea, but it had cooled too quickly, as if the warmth of the evening had been sucked out by something I could not see. Every sound seemed amplified. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even the soft breathing I took became loud in the quiet. I tried to reassure myself. The details the voice had mentioned, it had been coincidences, nothing more. Then I heard it again. A whisper, almost a sigh, barely audible. It didn't come from the phone. Not really. It was as if the air itself had formed words, the shadows in the room bending into soft, deliberate murmurs. I froze, the book slipping slightly from my lap. My own pulse echoed in my ears. I rose slowly, walking to the hallway, each step deliberate, careful not to make a sound. I pressed my hand against the wall, feeling the rough texture of the paint, grounding myself. The whispers grew, layered and indistinct, but always circling the edges of my awareness. I tried to convince myself that it was imagination, that the tension of a quiet evening, a single ringing phone, could do this to a mind alone. I glanced back at the lamp, its glow warm, steady, a small island of security. And then the whisper, just a few words, faint, almost gentle, but unmistakable, floated from somewhere near the floor. He shouldn't have answered. I froze. The words were not spoken to me. They were spoken about me. And in that moment, I realized something had shifted. This was no longer a wrong number, no longer just a curiosity. Something had noticed me. Something had been waiting for that moment. I picked up the call. I swallowed. I tried to move back toward the chair, tried to sit, tried to pretend the world was normal. But the stillness of the room felt wrong now. The shadows seemed heavier, closer, and the silence carried a weight I could feel pressing against my chest. I had answered the call, and somehow, that small act had opened a door I could no longer close. I told myself I would leave it alone. I would forget the whispers, ignore the small tremors in the air, and pretend everything was fine. But even as I made that promise, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Not by a person, not by a figure, but by something patient, waiting, and endlessly observing. The next morning, I woke to the quiet hum of my apartment, sunlight spilling unevenly through the blinds, casting bars of light across the floor. I tried to shake off the unease from the previous night, convincing myself that sleep would erase it. But even as I moved through the small, familiar spaces, the kitchen, the living room, the narrow hallway, there was a subtle dissonance, like the apartment had shifted slightly in the night, as if it were breathing in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The phone was on the counter, screen dark. I had not charged it overnight, but that small, silent rectangle seemed heavier somehow, as if it contained all the unease of the world in its dark, inert surface. I picked it up briefly, turning it over in my hand. Nothing. No missed calls. No notifications. Yet I felt it. The same pressure from last night, that intangible sense that the world had altered the moment I answered. I tried to go about my day, coffee, shower, work, but the sense of being observed clung to me like a shadow. Every sound was sharper. The faucet dripping in the bathroom seemed measured, deliberate. The hum of the refrigerator had a cadence, almost mimicking breathing. And the whispers, soft, indistinct, always at the edges of perception, returned when I was alone. By mid-afternoon, I was no longer questioning my own sanity. The strange, quiet phenomena were not random. They followed patterns. They repeated. A footstep on the stairs when no one else was home. A soft sigh from the corner of the room. A shadow that stretched longer than the sun allowed. Each incident small, almost ignorable in isolation, but together they formed a rhythm that was impossible to dismiss. I began noting them, writing each occurrence in a small, leather notebook I kept for mundane reminders. I wrote down the time, the sound, the location, and the subtle details, the way a shadow seemed to linger a moment too long, the faint temperature drop near the window, the unidentifiable scent that accompanied each whisper. Each note seemed to confirm what my mind already feared, that someone or something was deliberately interacting with me, testing boundaries I had not even realized existed. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, I sat in the living room, notebook open, pen poised but reluctant to write. The lamp beside me cast a small circle of light, barely touching the edges of the room. Outside, traffic murmured, distant and subdued. Then it started again, the whispers, soft and deliberate, circling my awareness. Words I could almost catch. He's here. I paused, my hand suspended above the paper. The phrase was not spoken to me. It was a statement. I was being observed, catalogued, described, as though I were the subject of an experiment I had unknowingly entered. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to bend inward, anticipating my next movement. My pulse quickened. I wanted to call someone, anyone, to explain, to validate my perceptions, but my phone sat across the room, inert. And I felt it, the quiet insistence, the pressure that would not relent, that pressed against my thoughts like a tide I could not resist. I noticed the pattern. Every whisper came in waves. A soft pause, then a low hum, then a word or two, carefully chosen, repeated. And as I watched, the small details aligned. The whisper's origin shifted slightly each time, tracing the edges of the room, always just beyond sight, always leaving me with the sensation of being circled, examined, and judged. By nightfall, I was sitting still in my chair, lamp casting the only illumination, notebook closed, hands trembling slightly. I could no longer ignore it. The voice was here. It was watching. And it was talking about me. Not to me, never to me, but always aware, always patient, and it knew far more about me than I could ever allow myself to admit. Putting them into words made them feel too real. As long as they remained unrecorded, floating somewhere between thought and sound, I could still pretend they were harmless. A misunderstanding, a trick of a tired mind. I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, the overhead light turned off, the room lit only by the faint glow from the street outside. The refrigerator hummed softly, steady and indifferent. I focused on that sound, letting it anchor me. Machines didn't lie. They didn't watch. They didn't speak. I began to reason with myself. I hadn't slept well. I worked too much. Silence does strange things to people when it stretches for too long. I told myself that voices don't appear out of nowhere. They always come from somewhere familiar. Memory, stress, guilt. Somewhere inside. That explanation felt almost comforting. I replayed the phone call in my head over and over. The way the voice had spoken calmly. The way it hadn't threatened me. It hadn't asked for anything. It had simply known. I wondered if that was the part that disturbed me most. Not the sound of it, but the certainty. The confidence of someone speaking facts, not guesses. I asked myself what would have happened if I hadn't answered. The thought lingered longer than I expected. I stood and walked slowly through the apartment, testing each room like a theory. Bedroom first. The air felt heavier there, warmer, as if it had been holding my absence. The bed was untouched. The window locked. Nothing out of place. The bathroom next. The mirror reflected me clearly. Too clearly. I stared at my own face longer than necessary, searching for something unfamiliar. Some sign that I was losing myself. But everything looked normal. Tired perhaps, pale, human. The living room was last. I hesitated at the threshold, hand resting on the wall. The whispers were quieter here. Almost respectful, as if they were waiting to see what I would do next. I sat down in the chair again. "This is nothing," I said aloud. My voice sounded strange in the stillness. Too loud. Too solid. The room did not respond. I waited. Seconds passed. Then minutes. The silence stretched thin, taut like a wire pulled too tight. Just as I began to relax, to believe that speaking had somehow broken the spell, the whisper returned. "He's calming himself." My breath caught. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't cruel. It was observational, detached, as though someone were narrating my actions from a distance. I felt something settle in my chest then. A realization I did not want to name. The voice was not trying to scare me. It was documenting me. That night, I lay in bed with the lights on, eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening. The whispers did not grow louder. They didn't need to. They were consistent, measured, always just enough to remind me they were still there. And beneath the fear, beneath the confusion, a quieter dread took root. Whatever had started with that phone call was not escalating. It was stabilizing. The next morning, I woke to sunlight bleeding through the blinds. It seemed ordinary, almost reassuring. Birds called outside, their chirps sharp and mundane. I could almost believe that last night had been a dream. Almost. I made coffee, my hands trembling slightly as I measured grounds into the filter. The smell of brewing coffee filled the kitchen, familiar and grounding, yet there was something beneath it, subtle, just at the edge of my senses, a presence in the quiet. I shook my head, trying to ignore it, telling myself that the mind plays tricks when it's been starved of normal routine. I glanced at my phone. The call from the previous night still lingered in my call log. I debated whether to delete it, block the number, or do nothing at all. Rationality whispered that ignoring it was safest. That was what I told myself. Ignore it, move on, pretend it never happened. But curiosity gnawed at me. The voice had spoken clearly, confidently, as if it knew things about me no one else could. What if it wasn't just a random stranger? What if it was someone trying to help, trying to warn me? My chest tightened at the thought. That rational explanation, the safe one, felt heavier than the risk of doing something, anything. So I dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, and then silence. I waited, listening, my heartbeat rising slowly but steadily. My hands gripped the counter as though it were a lifeline. Then, the voice returned. Not on the line, not directly in the call, but in my head, softer this time. Observing, commenting. You answered. It wasn't a question. Not really. It was a statement. Flat, calm, unyielding. And yet, underneath that neutrality, a weight pressed into my mind, subtle and insidious. I didn't hang up. I couldn't. My fingers felt frozen on the phone. My thoughts churned in quiet panic. What had I done? What did it mean that I'd answered? And somewhere, deep in the back of my consciousness, a notion I could not shake began to form. The act of answering had changed something. Not immediately. Not violently. But irreversibly. I put the phone down. It felt heavier than before, like it carried an invisible burden. I went about my day with the ordinary distractions of work and errands, but the normalcy was fragile. Every sound in my apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the wall clock, even the faint creak of floorboards, felt amplified like a subtle heartbeat that wasn't mine. By evening, I realized I had made my choice. I had broken the first rule, the safest rule, the only rule that might have kept me untouched. I had answered. And now I had to live with the consequences. The evening was muted. The city outside my window carried on as usual, cars gliding past, muffled conversations drifting through open windows, distant laughter from somewhere down the street. Yet inside my apartment, silence sat heavier than any presence I had felt before. I tried to occupy myself with routine. Dishes, laundry, checking emails. Each mundane task should have been grounding, a tether to reality. But each sound, each flicker of light from the street lamp outside, pulled at the edges of my focus. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was being watched, not by a person, not by a thing, but by my own mind. The voice had shifted. It wasn't yelling or threatening in the obvious sense. It spoke in murmurs, in sidelong glances of thought I hadn't had, weaving commentary into my awareness. I sat on the edge of the couch, holding my coffee like a shield. Steam curled lazily into the dim lamplight, and I imagined it carrying whispers. The voice never spoke aloud anymore. It didn't need to. It existed as a constant, quiet narrative, recounting my actions before I made them, observing my hesitation, judging my decisions. I reached for my phone, half expecting it to ring again. It didn't, but the vibration of expectation never left me. Every vibration of the refrigerator, every subtle click of pipes, felt like a heartbeat echoing inside my skull. My mind traced patterns where none existed. I wondered if I'd ever hear my own thoughts again without the shadow of that commentary hovering over them. Night deepened. The city quieted. Even the wind seemed cautious. I sat in the dark, staring at the muted glow of the street lamp on the wall, feeling a creeping, insistent awareness that I wasn't alone in my consciousness. I didn't sleep. Sleep felt dangerous, like closing my eyes would give the voice free rein over the unseen spaces between thought and dream. And then, as I sat, frozen with anticipation and dread, I realized there was nothing left to do. The choice had been made. I had answered the call. And now, in the quiet aftermath, I was left with the unshakable truth. It wasn't speaking to me. It had never needed to. It was always talking about me. I didn't move from the couch. I didn't reach for my phone again. I just listened, breathing shallowly, feeling the subtle pulse of awareness in the dark apartment. Outside, the world continued without interruption. Inside, I existed under observation. The night stretched infinitely. And somewhere, deep inside, I knew that nothing, not time, not distance, not distraction, would undo what had already begun. The quiet persisted. The commentary never ceased. And I sat, a witness to myself, caught in the unrelenting narration of my own life by a presence I could neither name nor resist. Eventually, dawn would come, as it always did. The city would awaken, but the voice would remain, constant, patient, unyielding, turning over every thought, every hesitation, every fear, until the end. And in that silence, I understood the true horror. There is no escape from being watched, not by eyes, not by ears, but by the mind itself.